The first signs were faint, like whispers you could almost convince yourself you hadn't heard. Emma and I had always been the couple others envied. She was poised, polished, and magnetic, a top-tier interior designer who moved effortlessly through high society circles. I was the venture capitalist who rarely missed. Together, we were unstoppable, or so I thought. It started with the little things. Emma, who'd once been meticulous about our time together, began canceling plans. "I'm so sorry, Nathan," she'd say, her eyes wide with regret. "The Peterson project is killing me. They keep pushing deadlines. Rain check on dinner." I shrugged it off. Work could be relentless, and she'd always been dedicated to her craft. But the excuses piled up: late meetings, impromptu business trips, a sudden wave of demanding clients. One night, she came home late from what she claimed was a client dinner, wearing a red dress I hadn't seen before. She looked stunning, her face glowing with that post-success flush she got after landing a big deal. I moved to kiss her, but the smell stopped me: subtle, expensive cologne. "Not mine." "Good night?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "Oh, amazing," she replied with a dreamy smile, slipping off her heels. They absolutely loved the new concept. I nodded, but something gnawed at me. It wasn't the cologne, not entirely. It was the way she spoke, too carefully, as if rehearsed. The doubt gnawed at me. A joke slipped out during a weekend brunch with friends. Late nights, designer dresses. "You're not running off with a secret lover, are you?" Emma's laugh was musical, almost too perfect. "Only if he can afford better wine than you, darling." The table erupted in laughter, but her eyes flicked down for a fraction of a second, and I knew. That was no joke. It was a tell. By the time we got home, my mind was churning. I replayed every offhand remark, every late night, and every fleeting moment that had felt slightly wrong. Emma's life had become a puzzle with too many missing pieces, and I wasn't the kind of man to let a puzzle go unsolved. I resolved to watch more closely. For a while, at least, I would play the perfect husband, just as she played the perfect wife. It wasn't long before the first thread in Emma's web of lies began to unravel. It came, ironically, from her phone, a device I'd never had the urge to check before. I wasn't snooping. I'd only glanced at the screen when a notification popped up while she was in the shower. "Lila, can't wait to see you tonight." Emma and Lila had been close for years, and the message seemed innocent enough. But something was off. Lila wasn't the type to gush like that, and the timestamp didn't line up with Emma's late-night meeting. I leaned against the kitchen counter, staring at the screen. Why would Lila need to send a text like that? And why had Emma started disabling her message previews recently? When I casually asked her about it later, she brushed it off with ease. "Oh, Lila's been dealing with relationship drama," Emma said, swirling her wine glass lazily. "She overshares. I thought it'd be better to keep things private." Her voice was calm, but it was too perfect, too rehearsed. I didn't press her. Not yet. In the days that followed, I started noticing patterns. Emma's meetings and client dinners always seemed to coincide with her messages from Lila. She'd come home smelling faintly of cologne or alcohol, her stories consistent but strangely devoid of detail. Emma, who had once shared every triumph and frustration with me, had suddenly become tight-lipped. The final push came when she forgot to delete a confirmation email from her inbox. I wasn't even looking for it, but there it was, sandwiched between a client invoice and a flight confirmation. Reservation confirmed for 2, Carlton Suites. The Carlton was one of the most exclusive hotels in the city. And Emma, the meticulous planner, didn't make mistakes like leaving an email like that sitting in her inbox. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. Hiring a private investigator felt like crossing a line, but I justified it to myself. I wasn't jumping to conclusions, I just needed clarity. If I was wrong, then I'd put this paranoia to rest. If I was right, well, I needed to be sure before I acted. The investigator was a no-nonsense guy named Harris, recommended by a lawyer friend of mine. Discreet, efficient, my friend had said. He'll get you what you need without causing a scene. I handed Harris a picture of Emma and a rough timeline of her late nights. He didn't ask any unnecessary questions. He just nodded, took the file, and told me to expect an update in a week. That week felt like an eternity. Emma carried on as usual, blissfully unaware. She joked about her crazy schedule, kissed me goodbye in the mornings, and even suggested we plan a weekend getaway once her projects calmed down. I played along, every affectionate word from her lips twisting the knife deeper. When Harris called, I braced myself. "I've got something," he said, his tone neutral. "It's a lot. Can I meet you in person?" 2 hours later, I sat across from him in a quiet cafe. He handed me an envelope that felt heavier than it should have been. I hesitated before opening it, my fingers suddenly heavy. Inside were photos, timestamps, and receipts. Emma wasn't meeting Lila. She was meeting them. The first photo showed her at a rooftop bar, leaning into a man I recognized as Jonathan Davis, a senior partner at a high-powered law firm. They were laughing, her hand resting on his arm. The second was worse. Emma stepping out of a hotel lobby arm in arm with Eric Fisher, a tech mogul whose name had recently graced the cover of Forbes. Then came the final set. This time, it wasn't a lavish setting, it was a gym parking lot. Emma was tangled in an embrace with her personal trainer, a man half her client's age and twice their charm. 3 men. 3 entirely different worlds. And Emma was gliding between them like a chameleon, her life splintered into fragments I'd never even glimpsed. Harris didn't say much as I stared at the evidence, my jaw tightening with every photo I flipped through. "She's careful," he said finally. "But not careful enough. Let me know if you need more." I thanked him, left a generous tip, and walked out into the crisp evening air, the envelope feeling heavier than it should have. By the time I got home, Emma was there, humming softly as she chopped vegetables for dinner. She smiled when she saw me, her face lighting up like nothing had changed. "How was your day?" she asked, pouring me a glass of wine. I smiled back, the picture of composure. "Oh, you know. Same old, same old." Inside, I was already planning. Confronting Emma immediately would have been satisfying, but satisfaction wasn't my goal. Not yet. I knew Emma, her ability to twist situations and play the victim. A heated argument would only give her room to maneuver, to paint me as paranoid or insecure. If I was going to destroy her web of lies, I needed to do it piece by piece, with precision. For the next week, I played the part of the loving, oblivious husband. I cooked dinners, booked us a couple's massage, even surprised her with tickets to the opera. Emma, whether out of guilt or sheer arrogance, seemed more attentive than ever. She laughed easily, wrapped her arms around me more often, and leaned into our charade of a perfect marriage. But while she performed, I observed. Every smile she gave me, every kiss she placed on my cheek, was like a dagger. I kept the anger in check, channeling it into planning instead. I'd already compiled the evidence from Harris. Now I needed to deepen my understanding of Emma's double life, to uncover the motivations behind her betrayal. I started following her patterns. Her client dinners with Jonathan Davis occurred every other Thursday, like clockwork. A lawyer with a reputation for winning impossible cases, Davis was as polished as Emma, his tailored suits and easy charm a perfect match for her social ambitions. Eric Fisher, the tech mogul, wasn't as predictable. Their meetings were sporadic, but when they happened, they were indulgent. 5-star hotels, late-night excursions to exclusive bars, and expensive gifts that I suspected Emma passed off as business perks. And then there was the trainer, whose name Harris had given me, Kyle Dawson. Kyle was young, cocky, and surprisingly careless. Emma's visits to his gym were disguised as fitness sessions, but they often ended with her sneaking out the back door with him, her hair disheveled and her lipstick faintly smudged. Each man seemed to serve a different purpose in her life: power, luxury, excitement. I couldn't decide which was worse, that she'd fractured her loyalty among them or that she thought I was too blind to notice. I needed to bait Emma into slipping up further, so I started planting seeds of doubt in her mind, small things she couldn't trace back to me. One night, as we sat down for dinner, I casually mentioned Jonathan Davis. "Ran into someone who works with Davis the other day," I said, spearing a piece of salmon. "Impressive guy. What's he like in person?" Emma froze for a millisecond, so brief I almost missed it. Then she recovered, smiling. "Oh, Jonathan's a brilliant mind. A bit intense, though. You know how lawyers are." Her response was smooth, but the flicker in her eyes told me she'd felt the jab. A few days later, I left an article about Eric Fisher's recent tech acquisition on the kitchen counter, carefully angled so she couldn't miss it. I didn't mention it, just watched her reaction. She glanced at the headline, her lips pressing together before she hurriedly shoved the paper aside. And with Kyle, I simply booked a surprise couple session at his gym. "That's sweet, Nathan," Emma said when I told her. "But I'm actually thinking of switching gyms. This one's gotten a bit crowded." The lie was so obvious it was almost insulting. With every calculated move, I saw Emma begin to falter. She grew quieter, her usual confidence dimming under the weight of her secrets. But she still hadn't cracked, and I still hadn't decided how far I wanted to take this. What I did know was that exposing her to me wasn't enough. I needed her to feel the weight of her betrayal on every front, personal, professional, and social. Emma had built her life on appearances, and I was going to rip that life apart. The perfect opportunity came when she announced her plans for a birthday party. "It's been so long since we've had everyone together," she said, her voice tinged with excitement. "Let's host something big, something unforgettable." Unforgettable. I smiled, the plan forming in my mind. "Sounds perfect, darling. Leave the details to me." The trap was set. All I needed was time. Emma's birthday was a grand event, our home transformed into an opulent stage for her social theater. Every detail was immaculate. A jazz quartet played softly in the corner, waitstaff circulated with trays of champagne, and the guest list read like a who's who of high society. It was exactly what Emma wanted, a glittering spectacle to reaffirm her status as the perfect wife, hostess, and professional. She didn't know it would also be the night her lies unraveled. I spent days preparing. Every element of the evening was a cog in the machine I'd carefully constructed. Hidden cameras had captured Emma's movements with her lovers over the past month. Harris had provided clean, edited footage, short enough to hold the crowd's attention, damning enough to destroy her reputation. Emma was radiant that night, dressed in a shimmering silver gown that clung to her like a second skin. Her smile was dazzling, her laugh light and airy. She was in her element, gliding from guest to guest, a glass of champagne in hand. "Nathan, everything's perfect," she whispered to me during a brief pause, her fingers brushing my arm. "Thank you." I smiled back, calm as ever. "Anything for you, Emma." As the night wore on, the atmosphere grew more lively. Conversations buzzed, laughter echoed through the house, and Emma basked in the attention. I waited for the perfect moment, when the crowd was at its peak, and all eyes were on her. It came just after I raised a toast. "To my incredible wife," I began, my voice carrying over the chatter. The room quieted, and Emma looked up at me, her expression glowing with pride. "Emma, you've brought so much joy and elegance to our lives. Tonight, we celebrate not just your birthday, but the brilliance and beauty you bring to the world." Applause erupted. Emma smiled, tilting her head slightly in faux modesty. "And in the spirit of sharing brilliance," I continued, my tone steady, "I've put together a little tribute. A glimpse into the life of the woman who inspires us all." The lights dimmed, and the screen on the far wall flickered to life. The first clip was subtle, Emma at a rooftop bar with Jonathan Davis, leaning in close, her laughter lingering a bit too long. A murmur ran through the room, but the guests hadn't grasped the full implication yet. The next scene showed her entering a luxury hotel with Eric Fisher, his hand resting on the small of her back as they disappeared through the glass doors. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Emma's smile faltered, her hand gripping her champagne flute so tightly I thought it might shatter. But the final clip delivered the fatal blow. Emma, in gym attire, exiting through the back door of Kyle Dawson's gym, locked in a passionate embrace with him. The guests weren't murmuring anymore, they were staring wide-eyed at Emma. The screen went dark, and for a moment, silence hung heavy in the room. I raised my glass again, cutting through the tension. "To the truth," I said, my voice calm but firm. "It's not always as glamorous as it seems, is it?" The aftermath was chaos. Guests exchanged hushed whispers, their eyes darting between Emma and me. Emma's face was a mask of horror. She stammered something incoherent, tears welling in her eyes as she turned to me. "Nathan. It's not what it looks like." "Oh, I think it's exactly what it looks like," I replied, my tone as sharp as a blade. Without another word, Emma fled upstairs, leaving behind a trail of whispers and judgmental stares. The party didn't last much longer. Guests made polite excuses and left, their curiosity sated. By the time the last straggler walked out the door, the house was quiet again. I stood in the empty living room, surveying the aftermath. Champagne glasses abandoned on tables. A single high heel, kicked off in haste. And Emma's perfect world, shattered beyond repair. The trap had been sprung, but I wasn't done yet. The public humiliation was only the beginning. Tomorrow, I'd begin dismantling everything she'd built. By morning, Emma's curated life had already begun to collapse. The video from the party had been shared discreetly among the guests, and I knew it wouldn't stay quiet for long. People in our social circle thrived on scandal, and this one was juicier than anything they'd seen in years. Emma hadn't come downstairs after the party. When I woke, the house was silent, her side of the bed untouched. I found her in the guest room, curled up in a robe, her eyes red and swollen. "Nathan," she croaked as I stepped into the doorway. "Please, can we talk?" I crossed my arms, leaning against the frame. "Talk about what, Emma? The lawyer, the billionaire, or the trainer? Or should we start with the lies you told me every day for God knows how long?" She buried her face in her hands, her voice muffled. "I made mistakes. I wasn't thinking clearly. It wasn't about you. It was. I don't know why I did it." "Spare me the self-reflection," I said coldly. "You don't know why? Let me help. It's because you thought you could have it all, your perfect life with me and whatever thrill you were chasing with them. And for a while, you got away with it. But now..." I let the words hang in the air. "Now we're going to see how much of that all you can keep." I left her there, the sound of her quiet sobs trailing after me as I went downstairs to make coffee. Emma's destruction wasn't just personal, it had to be total. I started with Jonathan Davis. Harris had compiled enough evidence of their escapades to make my next move easy. A carefully worded tip to his firm's ethics committee, paired with the damning video, was enough to launch an internal investigation. Within days, Jonathan's spotless reputation was tarnished, and whispers about his improprieties began circulating in legal circles. Eric Fisher was next. Tech billionaires thrive on their image, and Eric was no different. I sent an anonymous email to his company's board, attaching a few choice clips of his late-night adventures with Emma. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. Eric's stock dropped slightly as rumors swirled, and while he wasn't ousted, the scandal left a stain on his public persona. Kyle Dawson, the personal trainer, was the easiest target. He had the least to lose but the most to fear. A quiet visit to his gym was all it took. He met me in his office, the cocky demeanor he'd shown in the photos nowhere to be seen. "Mr. Black," he said nervously, gesturing for me to sit. I didn't expect to see you here." "Relax," I said, sitting across from him. "I'm not here to cause a scene. I just want to make something clear." I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "Leave town. Today. If I ever hear your name again, you'll wish this conversation had ended with me pressing charges. Understand?" Kyle nodded, his face pale. By the next morning, his social media accounts were deactivated, and he was gone. Emma's professional life didn't escape unscathed, either. Her client base, drawn from the same elite crowd that had attended the party, began to evaporate. Cancellations rolled in one after another, polite excuses masking the real reason. No one wanted to be associated with her scandal. Even her friends abandoned her. The women she'd once lunched with, who'd gushed over her design projects and praised her taste, now avoided her calls. Emma, who had built her identity on charm and connections, was suddenly untouchable. The house grew quieter each day, the silence broken only by the occasional sob I heard from the guest room. Emma didn't beg me to stop. She must have known it was pointless. This wasn't just revenge, it was a reckoning, and I was intent on seeing it through. By the end of the week, Emma finally emerged, her face pale and drawn. She stood across from me in the kitchen, her hands trembling as she clutched a mug of tea. "Nathan," she began, her voice hoarse. "You've made your point. You've taken everything. What do you want from me now?" I stared at her for a long moment, taking in the broken woman in front of me. She looked nothing like the Emma who had once commanded every room she entered. "What do I want?" I repeated. I slid a folder across the counter. "To end this." She opened it, her eyes scanning the documents inside. Divorce papers, along with a clause transferring our joint assets to me. "I could take this to court," she said weakly. "You could," I replied, my voice calm. "But then I'd share everything with the tabloids. I'm sure the IRS would also love to know about the unreported gifts from your billionaire boyfriend." Emma's breath hitched. "You'd really do that?" I leaned forward, locking eyes with her. "What do you think, Emma? Sign the papers, and you walk away with whatever dignity you have left. Refuse, and I'll make sure you lose everything." Her shoulders slumped. After a long pause, she picked up the pen. "Fine," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You win." She signed, and with a single stroke of the pen, our life together was over. But her reckoning wasn't. Not yet. The ink on the divorce papers was barely dry when I began setting the final piece of my plan into motion. Emma thought she'd reached the end of her punishment, that signing away her claim to our assets and walking away in shame was the price she'd paid for her betrayal. She didn't realize I still had one more card to play. Her parents had always idolized her, holding her up as the golden child of their affluent, upper-middle-class world. They were old school, the kind who cared about appearances above all else. I knew that the truth about Emma's double life would hit them harder than any financial loss or social disgrace. For years, they'd been distant with me, their judgment always subtle but palpable. "Nathan doesn't seem very family-oriented," her mother had once remarked, as if my career success was somehow a flaw. But now, they'd see the daughter they idolized for who she really was. So, I invited Emma's parents over for coffee. She had no idea. It was better that way. When they arrived, their smiles were polite but guarded, as usual. I wasted no time. "I wanted to meet with you because I think you deserve to know what's been happening," I began, handing them a slim folder filled with carefully curated evidence. "Emma and I are no longer together, and I thought you should see why." Her mother flipped through the contents, her face blanching with each photo, text message, and receipt. Her father's jaw tightened, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. This can't be true," her mother stammered, her voice trembling. "It is," I said, my tone calm and deliberate. "I tried to salvage things, but there's no coming back from this. I wanted you to hear it from me before it became public." That last part wasn't entirely true. Most of the scandal had already circulated among our social circles, but they didn't need to know that. The goal wasn't just to inform them, it was to dismantle whatever illusion they still clung to about their daughter's perfection. Her father finally spoke, his voice cold and clipped. "Thank you for telling us. I can't say I'm surprised. Emma's always been selfish." It was a small admission, but it felt like a victory. By the time they left, her mother was in tears, and her father's carefully constructed mask of pride had cracked. Emma called me later that night, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. "What did you say to my parents?" she demanded. "I told them the truth," I replied evenly. "You should try it sometime." "You had no right to do that," she hissed. "No right to drag them into this." "They deserve to know who their daughter really is," I said, my voice sharp. "And don't forget, you're the one who gave me all the ammunition. If you want to blame someone, look in the mirror." She hung up, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of closure. Emma's world had shrunk to nothing, her reputation ruined, her social circle gone, her family disillusioned. All that remained was the woman herself, stripped of her facade. In the weeks that followed, I began rebuilding my life. The house felt empty without Emma, but it was a good kind of empty. Peaceful. I reclaimed the space, redesigning it in small ways that felt like an erasure of her influence. New furniture, fresh paint, even a different brand of coffee. Professionally, I thrived. Without the weight of Emma's lies dragging me down, I found myself sharper, more focused. Deals that had once felt like an obligation now sparked genuine excitement. Every now and then, I heard whispers about Emma. She'd moved into a modest apartment across town, far from the glittering social circles she once inhabited. Rumors swirled about her trying to rebuild her career, but the cancellations had been a death knell for her business. Her name, once synonymous with elegance and exclusivity, now carried the taint of scandal. I never reached out to her. I didn't need to. Watching from a distance as she struggled to pick up the pieces was enough. Revenge, they say, is a dish best served cold. But the truth is, it's not nearly as satisfying as people think. It doesn't erase the betrayal, the hurt, or the anger. It doesn't fill the void left behind by someone you once loved. What it does do is restore balance. Emma had taken everything, my trust, my love, my faith in her, and shattered it without a second thought. By the time I was done, I'd taken everything from her in return. Was it worth it? On most days, I'd say yes. The silence of the house feels better than her lies ever did. The freedom to live without second-guessing every smile, every touch, is its own kind of reward. But there's a part of me that wonders what might have been if she'd chosen differently. If she'd come to me, told me what she was missing, and given me a chance to fix it. It's a fleeting thought, though, one that I dismiss as quickly as it comes. Some people don't deserve second chances, and Emma was one of them. Now, as I sit in the quiet of my new life, I find solace in knowing that the worst is behind me. And while revenge didn't heal the wounds, it ensured that the person who caused them would never forget my name.